Game design? Great. So my name is Brooke Allen, and you can find me at brookeallen.com. And my email is brooke@brookeallen.com. And so this is a talk about game design for contesters, since we're all contesters, and contesting qualifies as a game. So let's figure out what that. All right. Now, so a little bit about my history. I was born in 1952. I was licensed as WB2RWY in 1966. In 68, I operated my first contest. My Elmer was W2VJN. It lived only a few miles from me. I didn't, George Cusso George. He helped me a lot when I was young. I've been licensed and I've operated from about 30 countries or so. I'm married to N2GSG. Most of my operating was with relatively modest antennas or on the DX side. But back in 87, my wife and I bought some property in the Catskill Mountains and we put up some towers. So that's those towers. When we sold the property, we sold them to some non-hams, but they left the towers up and they rented the towers out through what's the name of the most popular tower rental? Are you guys there?
Radio?
Right, remote ham radio, and for about 4 years, and they stopped renting them, and so they're available if anybody wants to have a tower on the East Coast. Okay, and in 2010, I was attending a conference, a random conference about some business thing, and a speaker was asked from the audience, what is taught today in college that wasn't even taught when you went, that you would recommend learning? And she said, game design. I was like, wow, I've got to learn about that, because I really enjoy trying to make things fun. So I studied game design and I designed some games, and I wrote a series of articles for the NCJ in 2012, 2013, and also there'll be a link to those. You can download PDFs of those articles. So this is a sort of abbreviated and updated version of that. So I'm going to, there's this book I highly recommend. This is the book that I studied from. It's called The Art of Game Design by a guy named Jesse Schell. It's a wonderful book. It's a college textbook. It's about 500 pages long. And it takes you through designing games, all aspects of it, including designing a business to design games and make a living at it. So let's start with a definition. So what is a game? So why don't we make this a game? Who can tell me what how would you define a game if you were a game designer? Hello?
It's a contest.
Okay.
Entertainment with competition.
Right. So that would be
where you achieve where you win the end by achieving certain goals.
Okay. So it turns out that there's so many different kinds of things that qualify as games, like, I don't know, playing solitaire or whatever with cards, that people have thought about it a lot. And there was a philosopher, Bernard Suits, who came up with this definition. It's the voluntary attempt at overcoming unnecessary obstacles, which is pretty much what ham radio is, right? I mean, my wife is like, is there any reason to do any of this? And the answer is pretty much no. But other than it's fun, right? So what is the goal of a game? This one should be easy. Give me
To win.
Winning.
to win.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's generally, well, if you're a contester, that's generally what you would say, right? But not all games are contests, right? So the goal is to have fun. So that's probably why you guys don't think Field Day is a contest, because it doesn't seem like people care that much about winning, right? But it could still be a game because it's a lot of fun for a lot of people who participate. It's fun for me too. It's also the one that seems to regularly involve alcohol as part of its game mechanic. Anyway, but so now what is fun? How would you define fun? Now, this one stumped me when I was studying it. How would you define fun? It's like, I don't know, pornography, you know it when you see it, but
But increasing your dopamine quotient.
yeah,
Achievement. There's an intellectual challenge aspect too to some games.
yeah, those are sort of, so anyway, this book has a really interesting definition. It's pleasure with surprise. So these are, I mean, understand, these are designers, right? I mean, it would be like game designers talking about this stuff would be like, the lay public talking about electricity, right? They don't really know what it is. But anyway, so pleasure with surprise. And so this is actually very interesting because it turns out one principle of game design is if you're doing something that's pleasurable and you want to punctuate it with something surprising, generally you have to punctuate it with something that is unpleasurable, right? Because if you're tooling along as pleasure, 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 and then surprise, it's hard for the surprise to be more pleasure, right? And so what that actually does is reset your dopamine levels. And we'll talk later about how you do that in designing a contest. So it turns out that failure is more rewarding than success. I've met people who've just entered our contest, our hobby, blew a whole bunch of money, built like amazing stations, won every year for a few years and said, okay, I'm bored, right? Because they didn't fail enough. Okay, and so now if we're going to define game design, what is design? And I'll just tell you how they define it. It's the act of deciding what a thing should be. It's not the thing, it's a decision-making process. It's not a building process, right? So it's like the architect creates the plans for the building, but doesn't build the building. So that's what game design is. Okay, so the game design is the act of deciding what a fun thing should be. In this book, Art of Game Design is very general because these days, pretty much anything can be a game. Okay, so ham radio for me qualifies as a game because it's always involved voluntarily overcoming unnecessary obstacles in the pursuit of fun. And here's me when I was a novice. On the left is Walt Kornienko, my friend K2WK, and I'm on the right, and that's my HR10. And below it is a homebrew transmitter that I built out of the handbook with parts from an old TV set. That's a single tube, sweet tube, single tube CW transmitter that managed to get a chirp with a crystal. So that was pretty impressive. Okay, so for me, ham radio is a gun. Now, game designers actually have 4 kinds of fun that they talk about. One is called hard fun. Then there's easy fun. There's serious fun and people fun. And each of these kinds of fun, most successful multiplayer games. And by the way, the game industry is bigger than the film industry. It's huge. There's billions and billions of dollars that go into the game industry, right? And most really successful multiplayer games appeal to more than one of these kinds of produce for different kinds of people, these different kinds of fun. So here's a infographic, and this is too much for you to parse, but we'll look at parts of this. But these are these 4 different kinds of fun on one chart. Oops. So hard fun provides an opportunity for challenge, mastery, feelings of accomplishment. Hard fun focuses attention with a goal, constraints, and strategy. So I would say that the way you guys have defined fun, you're talking about hard fun. You know, winning, having goals, succeeding, constraints. And serious contesters are pursuing hard fun. And this is, now the goal of a game is to create a feeling, an emotion. So if we look at this chart down here at the bottom, on this design sort of graph, are actions that you can do, right? So there's goals, obstacles, strategy, and those lead to emotions pointing up to the top. The emotion that it's pointing to right at top is called fiero. Has anyone heard that term before? Any of you?
Means pride, doesn't it?
Pontiac.
Say again?
Pride?
Right. It means fiero in this context is an emotion, and it comes from an Italian word which means essentially pride in winning. It's like, I won, right? And game designers, and remember, there's a lot of money on the line, so there are people who spend a huge amount of effort in studying this. And one of the things they'll do, for example, is they'll put video cameras in front of game consoles, or they'll record people while they're playing a game, and they will monitor all their facial expressions and their emotions and things. And it was game designers discovered this emotion that they hadn't that the psychologists hadn't categorized before, and its universal expression is usually with the arms raised up in the air, right? And it seems like in every culture, like when you score a goal, you run around with your arms up in the air. That means I win, right? So that's the goal. On the left arrow here that says challenge, if the game is too challenging, the emotion you can feel is frustration. And if the game is less challenging, and this thing to the right, we'll study these 2 axes later, but to the thing to the right, if you're perfectly skilled and it's easy, so you're just like running JAs from the West Coast where they're loud and they're not, watery like they are in the Caribbean, then you feel sort of relief. I mean, that's just sort of easy. Okay, so that's hard fun. Then there's easy fun, and easy fun really inspires exploration and role-playing in role-playing games. And to create a game with easy fun, you want to have fun failure states. You want it to be discovery involves failure, but you want failure to not be punishing, right? And it just involves learning how to control. In designing a game, if what you want to do is have a community that replenishes itself. I mean, our hobby is getting really old. The average age of a contester seems to be going up by a year every year, right? The key to replenishing your player pool is having easy, fun versions of the same thing so that they can onboard and they can learn. Okay, so easy fun. The emotions we're trying to create are curiosity, surprise, wonder, awe. and we want to create things that are novel, that are surprising. And we're trying to engender curiosity. And to be honest, I'm going to be in WPX. I won that actually for a set a North American record from VP2M. So I was N2BA portable VP2M, which is a lot to say given that I was not a unique multiplier. There was a VP2V, there was a VP2E, and there was one other VP2 also in the same contest, but I did it. So one of the things is what I'm really interested in is, can we create novel contests, new contests that are very different from the ones we already have? Okay, so next is serious fun, and this is purposeful play. And this is what really got me interested. There's an offshoot of game design called gamification, which is how do we add elements to tasks that need to be done, to chores, for example, or just your job at work, to make it more fun. And in my case, and in my career, I actually, my background is in math, computer science, and finance. And in 1995, I started a hedge fund that was based on scanning the marketplace, every trade and every quote in every market in the United States. And what we'd look for is anomalous trades. We'd look for people who were becoming so eager to buy a stock, they would drive the price out of what we would guess would be the equilibrium price. And I actually built the software that the trader would sit in front of based on CT, the original contest software. So the trader would sit in front of this thing, and there would be all this data coming into it, and trades would pop up. And it might be, buy 800 shares of Microsoft and sell 380 shares of IBM, for example, because those two seem to be getting out of alignment. And you would work those. And I wrote it for myself. Eventually, I hired people to trade, but it would be from 9:30 in the morning to 4 o'clock. I would sit in front of this thing, and it was like operating a contest every day. And the score was P&L that would be calculated to the penny. So that is bringing game design principles to a job that you need to do that's more serious. Okay. So in serious fun, what you're really working for is this thing called Zen focus. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about something called the flow channel. But you've probably all experienced being in the zone, right? So the goal is to get in serious fun. The main characteristic of serious fun is that there's some real world meaningful consequence. Okay, so one of the, so that's where the word serious comes from. And then there's people fun, which provides excuse for people to just socialize, right? Icebreaker games would be example of pure people fun games, drinking games. So here the goal is friendship and good feelings toward each other and amusement. So of all the things that hams do, what would you consider the closest contest, people fun contest? Where would you vote?
Club meetings.
Field day.
Field day.
Field day, absolutely. Field day is, I've been to field day things where it's a lot of fun. And there have been participants who absolutely love every minute, and they're in their third year and they're still working up the courage to make their first QSO. But they've been cooking the hot dogs and they've been bringing the beer and they've been setting up antennas and they've been talking about it. They're working their way up to making a contact. So that's definitely
Multi.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And multi stations are very much people fun activities. Okay, so let's go back to this. This is the hard fun. I've turned it a little bit on its angle so that we can look at it as a graph with the challenge going in the vertical direction and skill going to the right. Okay, and so the idea here is the greater the challenge, if we haven't improved our skill, but we've increased the challenge, we'll end up being frustrated. If the challenge stays the same, but we increase our skill, so we move off to the right-hand side, then we're going to feel a sense of relief. It's going to be less challenge. The same exogenous, external challenge that we're being presented with will become less of a challenge as we become more skilled, right? As we learn to manage a pileup, for example. Okay, so one of the game designers talk about something called the flow channel. Now, have any of you heard of this term before, the flow channel? Anyone? Yes? No? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so there was a book called Flow by a researcher. His name is Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. It's not even spelled the way it's pronounced, but it's and he wrote a book called Flow. And what he did was he looked at what was happening in people's minds when they were performing a task. And what they discovered was that there's this state you can get into, runners will call it being in the zone, where you're completely consumed by an activity and it takes all of your ability, but not more, right? And so this is, for me, this is like the European runs. When the sun comes up and I'm running Europe, I am in flow. I'm not even thinking. And when people are in flow, they sort of lose sense of time and place. And they just become sort of like a machine. So a game designer wants to keep you in this flow channel. And the reason is because, game designers who are marketing games, what they're selling is addiction. And the flow state is the most addictive, non-chemically induced state. Humans just love to be in flow. That's why if you're designing a job at work, it's really good to try to figure out how to transform the work you have to do into one that keeps you in flow. Now, what happens is if you start out at a certain level of skill and your skill increases, but the challenge doesn't, you start to, as you come out of flow, you start to become, you feel like you have a sense of control. Now, when you're in flow, you don't feel like you're in control. You feel like you're just one with everything that's going on. Does that make any sense? It's sort of like if something happens, you react, you're just part of it, right? As you come out of it, you start to feel control. Then eventually you could start to feel relaxed. And at the point where you're relaxed, that's when you become sort of aware, you become more self-aware. You have brain cycles that can spend its time thinking about what it is you're doing. And if it still doesn't get any more challenging, you get bored. So the goal for a game designer is that when they notice that you're starting to get bored, is to level up. Now, in computer games, where you're like fighting monsters and killing orcs and doing that kind of stuff, those games will actually monitor your response times. And if you start to get bored, your response times will actually become longer and intermittent because your mind is wandering or whatever. And that's when like a new monster comes around the corner and really threatens you, something that really requires your attention. So it's not necessarily the case that you're involved in some narrative that's being randomly generated. The narrative is being generated to keep you hooked in the game. Okay. So there's actually a specialty in game design called a level designer, and he's a person who tries to get you to figure out when you're getting bored, when you're in control too much, to level up, make it more challenging, to get you beyond the flow channel into what's called use stress. Now, there's stress as of not all stress is harmful. Use stress is stress where you feel stressed. However, mastery, you can see mastery on the horizon. You could see how, if you keep doing this, you're going to get good enough to master it, right? If you level up beyond that, to the point where you can't imagine, you can't see how you could master this situation, that creates anxiety. And people at that point will usually like just quit. For me, for example, the most stressful thing that ever happened to me was when my amplifier blew up. And I was like, I'm not in the mood to like try to debug this amplifier right now. Luckily, it blew up right before the contest started. I operated low power, and I set a new US record for low power. And that got me interested in low power. Anyway, so this is how game designers manage your mental state. And flow is what it's about. Flow is the word they would explain for the reason why you are contesters, because you just really love that. Tell me if I'm wrong. Who wants to tell me I'm wrong? Okay, so now there are three different types of games, categories. One is a competitive game, and an iconic one is Monopoly. And so in competitive games, there's a winner and then there are losers. And then there are cooperative games, and cooperative games are more like it's all the players against the game. And if the players cooperate and they play well, then they all win. And if they don't play well, they all lose. And my favorite cooperative game up until a few years ago was called Pandemic. Except the real pandemic like took the wind out of it. So Pandemic is a game where all the players tried to prevent a virus from becoming a pandemic. And if you all cooperate, you succeed. And if some people are uncooperative, then it gets out of hand. And then there's another kind of game called a collaborative game. So collaborative games have winners and losers. However, to win, you have to collaborate with other players. So you win by helping other players win. And the player who helps the most other players win is the winner. So anybody have any collaborative games they like? Hello?
Amateur radio contesting?
Yeah. So my favorite is CQ Worldwide CETO. right? That's a collaborative game. You win by helping the most people win. I think it's awesome. I just really like that. And it's a good model for how well-running economies work. Now, in addition to types of games, there are types of gamers. There was this guy named Bartle. I forget his first name. Does anybody remember a computer game from the early 70s called Adventure?
Of
But-
course.
Yeah, a bunch of twisty little passages, all different. So there was a massively multiplayer version of that. It was still text-based, but you would wander around and you would just meet other people in those passages. And there was this guy Bartle who was like a psychologist or somebody. He observed that players in this game behave differently depending on some personality characteristics that he identified as relating to whether their style of whether they like acting on things or whether they like interacting with things, and whether the things they like to act on were the world or other people. Right. So people who like acting on the world, he called achievers. And so achievers, an achiever in like a multi contest sort of setting would be the guy who builds the station, right? He's trying to change the state of the world. Also, the people who are trying to win might be achievers in his taxonomy. Then there are explorers, and these are people who like to interact with the world. And these are more like the guy who goes out and hunts for multipliers. He's running a multiplier station. He's curious. This is the guy the explorer is the guy who hangs out on 40 meters way after he should be moving up to 20 because he just is curious about the propagation. Then there are people who like interacting with other people, and these are called the socializers. And these are the guys who bring the kegs of beer at field day. Now, he had the people who like acting on other people. He had an unfortunately terrible name for those people. He called them killers. And the reason was, in those games, the killers were the people who would come and befriend you and help slay the monster. And then afterwards, rather than celebrate victory with you, they'd lop your head off. Now, that's really unfortunate because in those earliest games, there just weren't a lot of ways for people to act on other people. There were non-player characters, but other players, there weren't positive ways for you to act on other people. But the goal is to really produce acting on other people, changing other people rather than just changing the world can be a very noble thing. So one kind of person in this upper left category is a teacher or a mentor, right? An Elmer. So these are people who get teaching others, acting on them. Another is a leader, someone who organizes and inspires others. And then we have cops, the people who like to preserve orders, and then killers, right? And so in designing a game, what you want to do is you want to give these people a role. Game designers call this putting killers on rails. You want to give them roles. Interestingly, in games in which you actually have cops and killers, it's the same kind of person who's attracted to both of those roles. They're two sides of the same thing. So a cop would be somebody like, I don't think we have official observers anymore, right? But making somebody an official observer is what a game designer would do, rather than having him just getting on there yelling at you over the air.
WRTC referees.
Right. Okay. So these are the various different kinds of games, right? Now, there are also two kinds of games in terms of duration. There's finite games, and they come to an end. And usually it involves determining who wins. Now, in a cooperative game, it's determining whether all the players win or lose. And something like CQ Worldwide, it's determining who's going to win. Of course, we have enough categories in these things now so that pretty much we're all winners. An infinite game never ends, and the goal is to keep players in the game, right? And usually, since players drop out of the game, an infinite game is one where you need to get new players into the game. You need to recruit new players. And so ham radio itself is an infinite game. And I think ham radio, the biggest place that ham radio as a hobby can benefit from what we learn from game design is how do we get new blood into our hobby, right? Because we're not doing a good job of that. It is we're growing old. Okay, so I'm going to describe 4 games that I've sort of invented. They're just game. This is imagine we have a game which is let's invent a game. So the game is invent a game. And I'm going to give you 4 examples, and then I want you to brainstorm some more examples. So has anyone ever heard of a game called Farmville?
Yeah, of course.
Really? Describe it, because I've never actually played it.
Neither.
Isn't it just a building up farms? I've never played it myself, but I believe that's the kind of game it is. Kind of like building cities and civilizations, except for farms.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Well,
My kid used to play it, but I never did it.
well, it's really there was a thing called SimCity, and SimCity was pretty impressive, and you built the cities and stuff. Farmville was actually, I mean, I never played it because it just seemed completely stupid. And it didn't have the intrigue of SimCity. What it was, you got a farm, and then on that farm you planted seeds, and then like the next day you had to water them, and the day after that you could harvest them, right? And then you could use that to feed a pig or a cow or whatever.
Right.
But it's just very simple dynamics, but it was really insidious. It was created by why am I blanking on the Zynga was the name of the company that made it. And what they did was they said, if you get other friends to join this game, and if you fail to water your crops, they'll wilt, except your friends can water your crops for you, right? But if your friends water your crops for you, you should really thank them by watering their crops. But if you fail to water their crops, then maybe you should give them a gift. So like if you raise a pig, give them a pig. So the whole idea, though, was that it was so slow in this free play that, and you could get so many friends helping you out. You want to give them stuff. You could spend money to get more crops and get pigs. And so that's how they made money. And some people went nuts. We actually had a friend who would spend over $10,000 a month because she had developed this vast network of people who were helping her create this massive thing. And she was thanking them. It was crazy. Though in that there's this model of games called free to pay, which means that you start out as free. You can play for free, but eventually they want to get you to pay. And if it's addictive enough, some players will pay a lot of money. Those players are called whales. So there was a game designer, academic game designer, who thought Farmville was just really horrible. And so he invented a game called Cow Clicker.
Oh,
And the idea was you had a cow and you had to click on it once every 6 hours. You just click on the cow and then you're done playing the game for 6 hours, and then you could click on it again. But you had a field. If you invited other people to join you, they could put their cows in your field. And then you could click on your cow and you get one click. But you could click on all their cows and they'd each get one click. And they could click on your cows every 6 hours. And that was the entire game. And if you still couldn't click on it, and then you could, if you connected, if you got enough cow clicks, you could upgrade your cow so it would just look snazzy or whatever. And if you couldn't upgrade fast enough, you could send him money and he'd give you some extra clicks, right? And he tried to create the most basic, simple version of this to illustrate how completely stupid it was, and it became a huge hit. And people are going crazy, clicking on cows and getting thousands of friends to put their cows in the same field and click on them. So I have my own contest inspired by Cow Clicker. I called it the EQSO Party. And the idea is your job is to exchange the letter E with as many people as possible. So, and it runs from January 1st to December 31st. And the letter E stands for everything you might want to send. Might want me to send that you can figure out without my help. In other words, if I send you the letter E, it means look me up on QRZ.com. You'll find my name. You'll find, if you want to know what the weather's like here, look at weather.com. Figure all I am prepared to say right now is DIT. So that's it's the cut letter for everything, right? And so eventually the idea is, understand, I'm trying to make a point. Like in CQ Worldwide, except for a couple of Russian UA zeros and whatnot, the software fills in everything for me, right? It knows what zone, it knows what, and it's going to be 599, right? So why don't we just abbreviate that to E? Now, I've designed a certificate you get. You win this contest by making one exchange of the letter E, for which you receive a Rag Sniffers Club certificate. So they don't have it anymore. Does anybody remember the Rag Chewers Club?
Yep.
Yeah, I remember, getting that one. That was the first one you got when you were a novice for spending half an hour talking to somebody. Which when I was a novice, I think I'd spend half an hour exchanging my name and QTH and the weather, and that pretty much took up half an hour. So anyway, and here's my QSL card. I actually did an operation from Nicaragua where I decided I would, outside of the contest, I was there for CQ Worldwide, but outside of the contest, I would just hand out signal reports and a dot and a DIT, and then you could get this QSL card. Okay, so here's another game. So a big question in game design is how do we attract a broad range of people? In the earliest days of video games, it was very male dominated. And then one game came along, and if you remember, most complex games that required a lot of hardware were arcade games. One game came along that was actually more popular with females than males. Who can guess what that was?
PacMan.
Right. It's PacMan. Why?
Wow.
I mean, there are two mechanics that they suspect it was really attractive. One was pursuit and then withdrawal, right? It's sort of like a flirtation. You pursue somebody, and then when you get close, you move away, right? And the other was eating, accumulation through eating. So here's this is a finite game. The other game you play, EQSO Party's infinite game. This is a finite game, and it's inspired by my first date with my now ex-YL. And I call it the Love QSO Party. And so the idea here is you exchange your name and one thing you love even more than ham radio. And of course, we're going to run this on Valentine's Day, right? And so your score is going to be the number of unique things or people love that you've received, right? Will be your multiplier. And you can work the same station on different bands, modes, but the multiplier is unique. So this way, of course, you could send nothing. You could say, I don't love anything more than ham radio. It's just that everybody who does that is sharing the same multiplier. Okay, so this is how it would work, right? So I would call CQ Love N2BA. And then N2GSG responds. And then I could say N2GSG Brooke, Deborah. So that would be saying, my name's Brooke, and I love Deborah more than ham radio. And then N2GSG responds, Eve. And then she says, sex. I love sex more than ham radio. And then I might say QSL QRZ. Of course, there's nothing in the rules that would prevent me from sending this, right? So when I say it is inspired by my first date when I met the woman who's now my wife, my previous girlfriend was named Deborah. And when I met her, she made the mistake of asking me if I had any hobbies. And so after about half an hour of telling her all about ham radio, it occurred to me that maybe, I should let her speak. So I asked her if she had any hobbies, and she said, yes, sex. I want you to know that's a great answer. But I'm scared to ask you guys, what would you say you love more than ham radio? What would you send in that exchange?
My honey.
Family.
Music.
Kid.
All right. So I think that contest actually has legs. I think it could be a really intriguing contest because it would give insight into people. All right. So here's a game inspired by my first shortwave radio. And so those last two contests would be contests that that hams would participate in. But now I'm wondering, how can we create contests for people who don't need to be a ham to participate in, but might get them interested in our hobby, right? So in this contest, I call it the worldwide SWL contest, right? So what you would do, it would run concurrently, say, with CQ Worldwide, and you could load up, your favorite contest software. It's just that you don't have a receiver. You're just going to pick one of these software-defined radio receivers around the world, and you'll be an SWL in that contest. So you'll tune around. So the advantage is, even if the bands are dead where you are, you find a radio somewhere in the world where things are really hopping, and you tune it around, and you find some guy who's running stations, and you log the people he's working. Have any of you used these software-defined radios to listen to yourself, for example? Or?
Yeah, I've experimented with them and used them.
I have not. I've only recently found them because I've had this idea for about a decade, and it occurred to me they've got to exist, right? So I found them, but now I realize how easy it would be to cheat, like in the 160 contest. Okay, so that's one.
It's
Now-
not easy to cheat because you got way too much latency. You drive you nuts. I experimented with it a while ago just to see what the latency was. Typically, it's close to a half a second.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to try it, but okay. Now, so my last entry is based on something called the DARPA Red Balloon Challenge. Has anyone heard of that? Okay, so DARPA stands for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and they're famous, among other things, for inventing the internet, which used to be called the DARPANET, or ARPANET in the earliest days. So they had this contest in 2009 where they offered, I think, $40,000 to the first team. What they did was they took these 10 red balloons, helium balloons, and they announced that on a certain day, they would fly these balloons in some public place in various places around the country. And they gave a $40,000 prize to the first team that correctly identified where all 10 of these were located. So just one morning, you wake up and there are these balloons with no indication of what they are, right? You have to know that you're looking for a balloon that looks like one of these balloons. And these were the locations around the country. MIT won the contest, I think, in 7 hours. And what they did, because the thing that's unique about this contest is how many eyeballs are you going to get looking for these balloons? And then how are you going to incentivize them? So what they did was they said, okay, for every balloon, we'll give away $4,000. We'll give $2,000 of that to the person who finds the balloon. And we'll give $1,000 of that to the person who found the balloon, who introduced the person to the contest, right? And then we'll give $500 to the person who found that person. And $250 to the person who found that person, right? So the way you could make more than, say, $2,000, you have to go searching and find a balloon, right? The way you could make more money than that is by getting 10,000 people into the game, right? So I was thinking about that. That game was won, and there were a bunch of teams, and you can Google DARPA Balloon Challenge and learn about it. It's really fascinating. All the different approaches people took. But the thing was, all the communication was done by internet. And DARPA wanted to know, like, what happened if somebody dropped 10 suitcase bombs around the country, and we needed to find them all, and the citizens had to figure out how to do it. How would we collaboratively solve a problem like that? But I'm thinking, well, if somebody's going to go has that, what if they take down the internet too, right? So I'm thinking we should have a Ham Saves World version of Field Day. We get DARPA to float balloons, but the contest is you're not allowed to use the internet for any of the communications. And then let's see if hams can find world organized people, right? So this is also a way. And I'm serious enough about it that I would promote this as a way of getting people who are not hams interested in the hobby, even if it's not, hams show up at bicycle races. What if we had a bunch of bicyclists on field day out looking for balloons for us? Okay. Now there's a thing called the Global Game Jam. The Global Game Jam is a contest for game designers. And the first one came out in 2009. And the way it works is it's a 48-hour contest starting at 7 p.m. local time, Friday night through 7 p.m. Sunday night. And you can have a team of as few as one or as many as hundreds of people. And what happens is at 7 o'clock in your local time zone, a video is released in which the theme for the contest is announced. And then you have to create a game that's original, that you haven't even begun working on before that time, to that theme. And the first year was 2009, and they didn't keep a lot of statistics then. By 2012, there was I don't even know what this theme is, image of our boroughs. In 2017, the theme was waves, and it could be any kind of waves, including radio waves. And in 2018, the theme was transmissions. And here are the number of entrants. So by 2018, at 803 sites, 108 countries, 42,800 people participated in creating games, and they created 8,608 games. So that's about 5 times the number of participants in CQ Worldwide. And if you could go to their website and you could see the games that they've done. So if I type in radio, there were 94 games that people created on that weekend. Radio Tower, Radio Wars, Radio X, Radio Sphere, right? Interstellar Radio Star, Beginner's Guide to Radios. Okay. And if you click on these, you'll get the game. So the final contest that I want is a contest. What if the way it worked was on day one, in the first 24 hours, you had to design and publish rules for a contest. And then in day two, you had to play that contest, whichever contest you chose, right? So let's say every contest got a 4-letter designator. You would try to create a contest. You'd try to promote the contest, get as many people to work in that contest as possible. And then when you got on the air and you saw somebody calling CQ, LOVE, like my love game, you would then look up the rules for love if you wanted to work me. And then I would work you, but you might have a contest you're promoting and I have to look up your rules. Okay. Now, the sense I get is that the ham operators that we have in the world today aren't going to go for it. But the young people I meet who are real gamers love that level of complexity. So do any of you guys have ideas, or have you had ideas as you've operated contests, of contests that you wish we had that we don't?
It's hard to think of a contest that somebody not us would enjoy. It's related to the fact that it was become dominated, at least in the folks in the younger generation, by FT8 and remote radio, and it's hard to figure that, but I think you're on the right track.
Well, what are the contests that you would like that you haven't seen?
So
If I had my choice, I would pick the 2001 CQ Worldwide. So I'm not qualified to give you an answer for the future.
one of the things that I think about a lot is how to tighten the time between the contest and actually knowing whether or not you won. I mean, back in the days of paper logs, right? You send in a paper log and then you wait months and months and months and months and months, and then the magazine comes and it's like a year after you worked the contest almost, right? And so one of the things I used to think about is, could you do a contest? I used to call it busted in real time. And the idea is we're all using computer logging software now. So there's a computer sitting in front of you. So the exchange is not fixed. The exchange is a checksum over your call sign and the other guy's call sign. The logging program computes the checksum and the other guy has to copy the checksum and he enters it into his logging program. And if the checksum isn't right, you know the QSO is busted right then, right there, right? And you can keep going until you complete. And so that, that solves part of the problem of, the QSO is good or it's not good at the time you log it. And I think now that a lot of us are running internet connected stations, I mean, I contest from off grid a lot, so it doesn't work for me all that often, but if you could connect to a central server, just make it a requirement that there is a leaderboard, and the contest ends at 2400 Zulu or 2359 Zulu, and you're done. You can go look at the score right now. see where you were.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's not, that's more of a mechanics thing than anything about the content.
right. That's how would we make, I mean, I know what you're talking about. I mean, I certainly remember, at the end of the contest, they spend more than 48 hours duping, and then, all that time on QSL cards and all that kind of stuff. And even now, recently, I got a plaque in the mail, and it's like, I don't even remember entering this contest. It's like, what the hell is that? So I qualified for some plaque on some like bizarre categories somebody, came up with. Like, I had no idea. So, but that's not changing the nature of the contest.
Right.
So one of the things that I thought about is, like, imagine the days when every rig is on the internet. So the way you enter the contest is that the price for entering the contest is you have to put your rig on the internet. But the one radio you're not allowed to operate is your own radio, right? And so, and you have to allow anybody to operate your radio. And so the first pileup you have to get through is the pileup on the radio. You have to do something to win the right to operate that radio for like 5 minutes, right? And so, but now so different people could compete to operate from, ZD8Z or something like that, right? And that, so, but what I was wondering is, how do we get rid of the geographical advantage people have and make it pure skill, but it's still over the air?
Brooke,
So that was,
Brooke, a suggestion. For me, just to put my own situation in perspective, I loved racing a car. I loved winning 2 national championships. When you finish a race, you won.
Right.
But that's not the kind of people you want to attract now. You're attracting folks who get on FT8, and the thing they love more than anything else is seeing online where they were heard. And so there already is a mechanism for attracting the current generation to things that would use ham radio. The problem that I've seen, and this is in the Stanford Club, for example, is that it's not all that much better than just doing it on the internet. And so, the games have been so well thought out that ham radio is having a hard time competing. Racing is too. And but I think you're on the right track, that there has to be an analysis of the demographics, the personality of young folks, and figure out what is it that attracts them. And I can tell you what attracts them. It's FT8. And so I think figuring out more complicated multi-step contests may be counterproductive compared to something which kind of runs itself, but has the kind of objectives that you so very clearly laid out in the in your talk, which is, by the way, terrific.
oh, thank you.
Brooke, I think you're going to have trouble getting people interested in any contest that goes too slowly. Most of us, at least us old people, get a thrill out of going fast. Dave used to get a thrill out of going fast in a car as well as on the air. But contests where there's a lot of analysis in real time before you can even begin to operate a station or make a contact might be more effective over a long period of time with episodic involvement rather than a short period of time with intense involvement.
Well, there in have you ever played World of Warcraft? Have you ever seen anyone playing? Because I would go watch my kids play World of Warcraft. And it's unbelievable how much stuff that they have to master. It's just like incredible. They have all these tools and these weapons and these different worlds and environments and all this kind of stuff. And they're moving like crazy. Their hands are moving all over the place. And how did they get to that level of skill? Well, it turns out that there's an onboarding process. There's 60 levels that you go through to really become a master at World of Warcraft. And it just starts out where you have to deal with a wolf, right? And the wolves are really slow and they're easy to kill or whatever. And there's a whole process that one goes through. Game designers call it the grind. And the grind is when you build skill, right? And the key is to be able to have a tool that can tell exactly where you are, right? So things are, when you say things are fast, what you're talking about is being in the flow channel. when you're talking, because when things get slow, your mind wanders, right? However, when you're trying to deal with something that's brand new to you, things feel fast. When you're first learning how to drive a car, everybody around you is driving too fast because you're like scared that you won't react to them fast enough, right? And then eventually you can drive home and forget which route you took home because you were on autopilot the whole way, right? And so the thing computers have allowed us to do is be able to monitor people's behavior and get them up to speed. Like, have any of you ever used Mavis Bacon typing tutor or anything like that? I mean, kids today, I took typing in high school. And it was an entire semester of ASDF, JKL, semicolon, all this kind of stuff. Our kids just sat down in a game and they were master typers in like 3 weeks. Here's the thing. FTA actually doesn't interest me too much. And it's sort of like, I agree with it. It's sort of like, it feels like the internet, only slower. I think an important thing to do, and I think we do not sell ham radio properly. And I'll give you an example of how I sold it to a friend of mine. This is back 15 years ago. We were driving up to the American Association for Advancement of Science, has a wonderful conference every year, which I much prefer to Dayton. It's a 4-day conference, and it's scientists from all over the world describing, their latest developments in language that anybody who got through high school can understand. So it's scientists talking to other scientists not in their field. So I've taken my kids to it from when they were in the 6th and 7th grade. I was going up to Boston with a friend of mine from work, and he was taking his son and I was taking my 2 sons. And I said, let's take my car. I have a ham station in my car. And he goes, why? What good is that? And I said, well, we could talk to people all over the world. He goes, what is it? Why? I mean, I have an iPhone and I could talk to people all over the world. And I said, yeah, but I can talk to complete strangers at random who I will never meet. And he goes, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I care about that? And I said, well, the reason is because it has to do with how my radio works. My radio uses FM. Do you know what that is? And he says, yeah, of course, it's frequency modulation. This guy's engineering background, math, physics. He goes, and he starts to tell me, I said, no, actually, it's not FM I'm using single sideband. No, FM stands for fucking magic. This is how my radio is going to work. This little thing, it's like smaller than a shoebox, puts 100 watts of power, like a light bulb's worth of power, into this filament that's a piece of wire wound around a piece of fiberglass on the roof of my car. And then I'm going to move electrons around on that. It's going to boil off photons, just like a 100-watt light bulb. And these photons will go off all over in the world, and they're going to bounce off. So most of them will go into the outer space or get absorbed by the ground, but some will bounce off the ionosphere and off of oceans and off of mountains and off of lands. And some of them will land on some guy's piece of wire or aluminum and in Italy, and it'll knock some electrons out of the orbit and they'll move back and forth. And his little box will hear my voice. And that's fucking magic. That's like me flashing my high beams and somebody seeing that in Europe. That's what we're going to do. And his mouth was dropped. He goes, that's fucking awesome. And so we took the radio and we would talk to people in Italy and Japan and Argentina. And he was like, this is unbelievable. Whereas everything else, that other stuff, all of that communication is being done by commercial enterprise. So that's how it has to be sold. And that's what I feel when I get on the air. I don't feel like I'm playing a video game. I feel like what I'm doing is somehow magical. Does it make any sense?
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Or do you want to wait until you're done?
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. How do you bring, I mean, there's a lot of hams that get their technician license and they use their handheld radio to, like you were saying, you know, help out at the bicycle race or something. How to bring those people into contesting? Is there a game that, because that would somehow, or well, HF or just contesting in general, could be VHF. You know, is there something about contesting the way it is now that is not attracting them, but could attract them?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not one of those people. I do know that one of the things that I would, you know, when we're talking about, when I was talking before about serious play, that friend of mine, Walt, the kid that in the picture when I was young, Walter and I went to Rutgers, and during the Nicaraguan earthquake over Christmas in 71, 72, he and I manned the station at Rutgers for 11 days doing relief traffic out of Nicaragua, because our radio station had time lines into New York City and Washington, D.C. And that was like a contest. It had all the, except it was very meaningful, right? So I think that providing communications for a race. I helped one year at the Mardi Gras in New Orleans. On pretty much every street corner, there were these scaffolding set up. This is back in the 70s. There were scaffolding set up above eye level, and hams were set up there, and they were coordinating where all the crews were located, because the police and the fire needed to know what routes were being blocked off if they had to get a fire truck somewhere, right? So I think that finding ways of being more meaningful, I think part of the problem with our contests is that they're actually kind of stupid. You know, they're, you know, we're not exchanging meaningful information. That contest, I really enjoyed doing the contest during the eclipse. Do you remember that in '87? A friend of mine, Jerry Gerens, N2BA, he and I went to Burning Man on a cross-country trip. It was something that was on his bucket list. I'd done it a few times, but he never had. So we went to Burning Man, and we spent a month on a road trip. We had a rig in the car, and we operated during the eclipse from Montana. So I think that the idea that we should get them interested in our contests isn't the most important thing. The question is, what are all the things about being contesters? What is it about it that we can bring to other areas, right? Like hidden transmitter hunts, to me, would seem to be really a very interesting thing, and for runners, for example, and where you just don't know where the finish line is, and you can participate in a hidden transmitter hunt without having a license, right? All you need is a receiver.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. You know, in Europe, radio orienteering is more the way they do it. You know, T hunts. Here, T hunts tend to be a road rally, and Europe is much more likely to be a foot race sort of, or a cross country
Right.
sort of thing.
Well, they tend to be healthier pretty much every time.
To Brooke,
Yeah.
it seems to me that there are two issues here. Contesting as compared to Warcraft, for example, is at a very advanced level. And you're not going to get somebody to come right into it at the advanced level unless they've been through all the stuff of burning out a 6L6 like you did, or whatever that tube was, and moving through it slowly. So I think you're on the right track. That the idea of game design should allow thinking about what is it that would make ham radio into an attractive game for the present demographic that you want to attract. And then from those, a few will get interested in other things, and they'll go on to more advancing. Just like, every high school kid now isn't interested in driving, so they aren't going to become race drivers either. But there are a few, and I think that trying to design a contest that would attract a newcomer is not the best thing. I think what you've ignited instead is the idea that there's games or things that are attracting billions of people, not just millions. And so how to make ham radio more game-like, but with the features that it offers. And so we need to think of, well, what are the features that ham radio has that you can't get on the internet, that you can't get with your iPhone? And I think you're right. It's a random connection to somebody with the same interests, but with a different culture. And so I think you're on the right direction, but I don't think that we're going to end up with contest winners from novices.
Have to show them the FM.
Right. And I mean, if you think about, my son became a game designer. I became interested in game design, and that got him interested in it. He became a professional and had a career that lasted about 3 years, totally burned out. It was it's a horrible profession to be in. He's working at 80-hour weeks or whatever, but he became a designer and a producer, and he shipped 5 titles. They were a subcontractor for Hasbro, and 4 of them were hits. So, and he's into games, and he built his own rig. I mean, those, a rig, that's what gamers will call their computer with the overclocked, 16-core CPU with, but you can build a really powerful gaming computer for $4,000 or $5,000. But my ham station, as modest as it is now, costs a lot more than that, plus the real estate and all that kind of stuff. So part of the question I have is there a way that we're willing to allow other people access to our equipment to allow them to experience what that?
We do that today. And
of course, yeah, we do it all the time, but is in terms of it's technically feasible all the time, but we don't do it with like 20,000 people participating in radio contests with borrowed radios. We do it with friends and stuff like that. But
yeah,
Brooke, another item that you touched on, which I think is having devoted my ham career to making better and better stations and had a good time with it, something that eliminates the advantage of the best stations, which is what FT8 does. I really think that the folks that don't appreciate what FT8 means to new hams are not in a good position to figure out how to attract them. But and it's the same thing. FT8 has this wonderful benefit that a piece of wire out your window is among the best of the stations, and please don't run more than 10 watts because it makes everybody else bad. So there's something in there, and the fact that it's now the most popular mode by a factor of 5 or something like that tells you that combining that with your game design questions is maybe a very fruitful way to get more people into ham radio.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I want to tag on something Dave said a little earlier too, right? Is, one of the things that makes radio unique against other communication media like the internet and cell phones is that radio is zero infrastructure. Your station is self-contained. You don't need to connect to a cell tower. You don't need to have an internet wire. And I think that figures into the FT8 wire out the window also is.
Right. I mean, it is that is magical. And the other thing that I think is magical, for example, is like these guys who've gone around the world with party balloons. It's just fantastic what they're able to do.
Well, it seems to me a lot of the kids now, they take a lot of things for granted. They're maybe not as curious. I remember the thing that got me into ham radio was not contesting. I didn't even know anything about contesting. I just looked at the TV, black and white TV, and said, damn, how does that work? I listened to the radio and damn, how does that work? And I wanted to be an engineer. I'm a little kid. I want to know how to build one of those. And
Right.
it's now they use these incredibly sophisticated machines and software, and they just kind of take it, okay, that's kind of like a given. There's no wonder in any of this. They don't see the wonder in it.
Matt, to bump in, you're right. That's what we were interested in because that's what was available. And I think for us to figure out what to do to increase ham radio, we have to look at it from the demographic viewpoint that we're trying to attract.
Well, yeah, that's actually my question is, what is the equivalent thing to help create wonder in the kids of today?
Game design.
Oh, that's right. There's to give you an example of how I hire. When I go to hire a programmer, I program in a language that isn't taught in school anymore. It's called APL, and it stands for A Programming Language. And it's a completely mathematical, symbolic language. It doesn't use keywords, it uses symbols. And it was developed in the early 60s by IBM, and it's continued to be enhanced, but it's got a very small community. When I hire, like the last person, I'm retired now. I shut down my business in 2014, but in 2012, I ran an ad in Craigslist that just said, programmer wanted, will train, enjoyment in mathematics a plus. If he has a resume, you can send it, but I'm not going to read it. If you have a question, just ask. So people wrote and said, like, yeah, well, like I have a question because I'm filtering on curiosity. Like, what the hell is this? And what kind of ad is this? So I wrote back and I said, well, I want people to program in this language that I use called APL. And here's a link to the reference manual. It's 500 pages. And this language is completely symbolic. And if you read the manual, you could figure out, for example, how to calculate the mean, standard deviation, skew, and kurtosis in a single line of code. If you could figure that out, just tell me in the subject line of a email reply. Do you have any other questions? Go ahead, right? And then I would just challenge them, right? And then I'd invite everybody, if you want to work here, come on in. I'd just invite everybody in for an open house. And I'd say, look, I am going to give a test 6 weeks from now in this language. And I won't hold it against you if you know nothing about it now. We'll see what happens 6 weeks from now. in the earliest days, in 2004, the first time I did this, I had 27 people who wanted to learn this, and I built a classroom for them. And they, and the challenge I gave them was I gave them this really complicated computer program game that I wrote in this language. It's a full screen, full multi-user game that simulated a marketplace. And I said, assume you have stolen this game from me. And if you ask me a question, I've caught you. You're a bunch of hackers, and I want you to automate index arbitrage, and I'm not going to tell you what that is. And then I went away, and I came back a week later, and these people had built a group on Yahoo, and they had found experts in index arbitrage that were tutoring them in index arbitrage. They found there was an outsourcing company in St. Petersburg, Russia, that sent them all their training materials that were in English. There was a guy in California who had had written a textbook that wasn't yet published, sent them a draft of their textbook. They had something like 73 people around the world helping them. And 3 weeks later, I had 11 people who were just really good. And so I held an open house. I rented a ballroom at a Midtown hotel. And, I had a budget that I would have paid to a recruiter, right? And I invited everybody who was interested in hiring people from this language to come. And I had people come from as far away as England and California to New York. And the number of the people that answered that ad got jobs paying more than I was paying out of that. It's just fantastic. And in 2012, I had 2 people. Then I said, listen, I can give you classroom space, all of that. They said, nope, we'll self-organize. They got a map. They figured out where they could find a coffee shop that was the best place for them to all meet in Manhattan, so they didn't have to come out to where I was. And I pretty much didn't hear from them for a few weeks. And then they, like 5 or 6 of them showed up, and they took the test. And 2 of them were just completely blew me away, both women. And one woman was just like so amazing. She was worth more than I could afford. For me to hire her would be a crime. So I called up a friend of mine and I said, I have a programmer for you, and I want you to just pay her. I was only paying $56,000. I said, I want you to pay her $80,000. And I'm not going to even let you talk to her. You have to decide now, yes or no. However, at the end of 2 weeks, if I was wrong, then fire her and send me the bill. I'll cover her for 2 weeks. In trading terminology, it was called fill or kill. Offers fill or kill, which is, take it or leave it. And he said, I'll take it. So that was Wendy. So he hired Wendy and I hired Melissa. Melissa was a math major, had never programmed a computer before. When I hired her, her last job, she'd been managing a bakery. When I shut down my business, I took all my employees, 2 weeks before shutting down, I took them all to something called a startup weekend. So a startup weekend is like a hackathon. It's like one of these game jams where usually 100, 120 people get together in one spot. And if you have an idea for a business, you announce it. And you try to get a team behind your idea. Melissa, the woman I hired that was a programmer who sort of taught herself enough to get the job, who was amazing. She got up and she said, I don't have a business idea, but I have a problem. I don't understand how I could become 27 years old and not know I was like a natural born programmer and I love this, right? What is it about girls that were not exposed to this? How could I have not discovered this before, right? And she formed a team and they won. And they built a business. It's called VidCode. And their idea was that girls really loved Instagram. And Instagram allows you to do transformations on people's pictures. However, you could hack the code. And so what they did was they created little tutorials for how to hack the code so that you could send somebody a picture that said, bet you can't do this. And then there'd be a link, right? So a girl gets, oh, that's really cool. How do I do this? You can't do it with Instagram normally. You follow the link, you get a tutorial on how to program, right? And she raised $1.5 million, built a business, launched it. So my feeling is that I don't know the answers to these questions. I have found it just a lot easier to just pose the challenge and people show up and do amazing things. It just completely blow me away. Okay, I wanted to just finish up on a philosophical note. Okay, so another way of looking at a game is we can imagine a game as a story generating engine, right? Your experience of CQ Worldwide is a story. You have something you can tell. Every time you play chess, you're generating a different story. But what is a life? You can think of a life as a story generating engine, right? In other words, you're writing your autobiography with your thoughts, your words, your actions. You're creating a story. You are a character in a massively multiplayer game where the most important thing you can control is your character and what your character does, right? And this is a much better model for how to live a life, that you're a character in a multiplayer game, than what a lot of people try to do is script a life. They try to write what's going to happen when they don't have much control over what's going to happen. Okay, so when I read this book, The Art of Game Design, and I had this thought, what is it that this book seems to be if I just replace game with life and player with a person? It just seemed the book reads like how to build a life. And sure enough, I wrote to the author, Jesse Schell, and I said, I noticed this thing, and he ends the book with a question, which is, he asks these questions, are called lenses. He says, the lens of your secret purpose, ask yourself, why am I doing this? So I wrote to him and I said, I asked myself, why are you doing this? I think the reason you're doing it is because you really want to write a book about how to live a life. And he wrote back and he says, yep, you got the secret of the book. And he gave me a copy of the book as a Word document, and I did the search and replace, and this is how it reads. What is life design? Life design is the act of deciding of what a life should be, right? No, life design is making hundreds or thousands of decisions. Here's the table of contents. A designer creates an experience. An experience arises out of a life. A life consists of elements. Elements support a theme. A life begins with an idea. A life improves with iteration. A life is made for a person. An experience is in the person's mind, which is really important, right? The games happen in our minds. They're not the external thing. It's the experience of the game. Right. So this was a fascinating journey for me. So I drove out to Pittsburgh and I interviewed him. So if you go on YouTube and look for Brooke Allen, Jesse Schell, Life Design, you'll see my interview. I interviewed Jesse about how could this book about game design be so helpful in designing a life. So that's one thing you could do, is find that game design as life design interview. Another thing you might want to do is look up and learn more about flow, because flow turns out to be a very useful way of thinking about how to manage oneself and one's interactions and with others. So we've talked so far about this flow channel in the upper right-hand corner, right? This map, and if you search Wikipedia for flow, you'll find a much more detailed article about it. And we talked about arousal or eustress, right? Good kind of stress, and then anxiety. And then at a certain point, you can become worried if your skill is very low, and the stress is low. And then, no, I'm sorry, medium. And at low skill and low challenge, you end up with apathy. And this is part of what I think we have as complaint about people, is that they're apathetic. Right? And the goal is to get someone out of apathy, is to give them a challenge that requires that they increase their skill. A lot of people try to entertain themselves out of boredom or apathy, and that doesn't work very well. So that's another thing if you're looking for something to. And then another book that I recommend is a biography called Just for Fun by Linus Torvalds, who is the man behind Linux. And he was asked, why did you build Linux? And he said, just for fun. And his whole idea is that there's sort of a hierarchy of three things that humans care about. The first is survival. Survival of the individual and survival of the species. The second is social order, maintaining our environment. And then the third is entertainment, just for fun. And of course, sex, especially since birth control, has become also a form of entertainment. Another thing you might want to look for is I wrote a story on time management that was published by Quartz, QZ.com. So if you Google QZ.com, my name and time management, you'll find a story that's called something like, use my terrible time management techniques and get more done. And it's really at its core about how from childhood, I have learned, I have lived what I've now learned is called a gameful life. So game designers talk about living a gameful life, which is designing things for fun, right? So what I tend to do is I manage my desires more than my time, because I find I don't like to do anything I don't like to do. I just won't do it. So I try to figure out how to manage my desire, get myself to like doing something. So that's the thing I work on first. So that's something else you might. And then the last thing I want to recommend is you look up my QRZ.com entry for YN2SX. So I went down to Nicaragua to operate the CQ Worldwide, and my host asked me, you can have any call letter you want. What do you want? And I said, well, how about YN2SEX? And turned out it was taken. But I got YN2SX. And so I made up this QSL card because I figured, I want to have a cool QSL card. And it turns out that sex is, the universe is something like 18 billion years old, and Earth is something like 8 billion years old. Well, sex is 1.2 billion years old. So I figured I needed, well, I was originally going to call it a special event station, but there's nothing particularly special about sex. So I said an ordinary event station. And I designed my QRZ.com page to be fun and interesting to read. Because I know when I'm in a contest or I'm just casually operating these days, for each person I work, I'll just look up their QRZ entry. And I got letters from people saying, you know, I worked you, I looked it up, I stopped operating the contest for 2 hours. I was just following all this stuff. I was getting such a kick out of it. So anyway, so that's just trying to bring fun into something that's normally a surprise. All right, so that's pretty much it. If you go here, you will find links to the NCJ articles, and you'll also find a link to something my wife suggested, the Contest Widows escort service. So the idea is you go in a contest and then an escort comes and takes your wife out for a very romantic dinner and so on.
Well, thanks, Brooke. It was a great talk.
Fantastic.